talk about indicators. I will now explain you how to define good indicators and to monitor progress. So there are two types of indicators, as I just mentioned for your question. There are quantitative and qualitative indicators. So as regards the quantitative indicators, they are objective, they are fact-based information, they are numerical, and can be easily counted. That's the first kind of indicators we think about when we want to develop indicators. They are, for example, number of qualified teachers, very basic. Whereas the qualitative indicators, they are more subjective, they are opinion-based, they can also be numerical, and they measure quality, opinions, and perceptions or system development. For example, a qualitative indicator could be the level of satisfaction with justice services. Or here you have more examples of qualitative and also quantitative indicators. So please remind when you developed a Logframe matrix that indicators are not always quantitative, and you can have qualitative indicators such as the existence of a new law, if it has been adopted or not. And you can also use different types of unit measurements. So the different measurements units, we've tried to identify some of them. You have the cardinal measure, for example, the number of people trained during the project, which is very basic. You can also have ordinal measure, which could be, for example, the level of satisfaction of users, what I just mentioned on the other slide. But you can also have different ones, such as a binary measure. So, for example, the existence of a law, it exists or not. Or you can also use the signal on the specific deadline, for example, on the respect of a specific deadline. For example, one workshop per quarter during a specific year. Or you can also use calculations of a ratio, rate, or trend. So, for example, the fecundity index. So these are calculations. Here are some examples of good and not so good indicators to explain you a bit how to define them and how you can improve existing indicators. Let's look at the examples. So what I just told also before is that indicators should not include any elements of the target. So for example, the first one, increased primary enrollment, is not neutral. You should have, which is better, the net primary enrollment rate per year. And then in your target, you should indicate very specifically what increase it should have and by when. So then you should remember that you should be very specific if it is annual or cumulative. Be also specific about what you mean by effectiveness or by capacity building. For example, here in this example, you have the strengthened capacity of parliament, which could be interpreted differently by different actors, so it will be difficult to measure. But if you use rather this indicator, the public perception of parliamentary effectiveness, this is less open to interpretations and thus it is easier to measure and also it is also more objective. Actually, if you look at the indicators on the left, they are in fact much more objective, but not indicators. These are better specified indicators. Based on the experience we have in screening the action documents, the common mistakes we found concerning the indicators are that they are very often not measurable. And actually, if you cannot collect the data, we cannot measure the progress. So it's a big problem. Indicators often include elements of the targets. So starting with the increased rate of something, increased number of children, etc. The indicators are often not disaggregated by gender, which is mandatory where relevant, as indicated in the instructions. Very often the indicators are not linked with the programming documents, which is also something that is required in the instructions and very important. As regards the number of indicators per results, we found out that there is sometimes no indicator or too many indicators per result. There should be at least one indicator per result, and the number of indicators for each result should be kept manageable, because then you want to monitor them. So the selection of each indicator should be based on the availability of data. If you do not have any data available, and if you do not know how to collect the data, then you should leave this indicator and prefer another one. Or you should choose, if you have too many indicators, the most important or strategic ones. So actually this is up to you to decide if you have a lot of very strategic indicators where you know that data is available, and at least you should have one indicator for each result. So we have seen how to define good indicators. Let's see now how they help us to measure change by the definition of baselines and targets. So what is a baseline? The baseline is a measure of the situation before the project starts, ideally. Actually, they should ideally be taken from existing data sources, and they are mandatory in order to measure the change. If you want to see the change, you need first to know where your starting point is. That's the role of the baseline. According to instructions, all indicators must have a baseline, or you should say in the action documents when the baseline will become available. But if you need to collect your own data, you should collect the baseline data very early, at the latest during the inception phase. You should note that sometimes baselines can be assumed at 0. For example, on the number of people trained at the beginning of the project. If it's a new project, you have 0 people trained. Or same for the number of schools built. If you start with this project, at the very beginning you have 0 schools. And the kilometers of roads rehabilitated. And in this case, the reference year should be the first year of implementation. What if baselines are not available at formulation stage? This happens actually. If it is difficult to present baselines and targets for certain indicators at formulation stage, it is necessary to explain why they are not available, but also when and how they will be collected and specified during inception stage. And this should be very clearly mentioned in the Logframe matrix, but also in the section 5.8 of your action document. This is very important. And note that in this case, if you need to have a specific survey to collect data for the baseline, you will also need a final study or survey at the end of the project in order to assess the results at the end of the project. So do not forget to plan a specific budget for that. Also plan the timing for this survey, and also plan who will be responsible for this. So you also need to set very clear targets. A target is the desired endpoint for each indicator. And as already told before, it should not be included in the formulation of the indicator, but rather in a specific column in your Logframe matrix. It is actually what is expected to be reached at the end of the project. According to the instructions for the action documents, targets must be included where baseline data is available. We often tend to be overambitious, but pay attention to make sure that the target is realistic given the resources you have and the capacity. And also pay attention that the target is achievable within the time period available for the project. And do not forget to disaggregate, just as the baseline, you should disaggregate by gender where it is relevant. So here a few examples of baselines and targets. So this is more of a qualitative indicator, the status of a new law. For the baseline, you need to very clearly mention the reference year. So this is 2014 in this example. The law is under discussion, it's non-existing, and our target, very clearly, it would be before 2017 that we want the law approved by the Parliament. Same for quantitative indicator. So for example, the stunting prevalence in children aged less than 5 years. The baseline, let's say it's 40% in 2014, and we want it to decrease by 2017 by 30%. So again, based on the experience we have with AD screening, the common mistake we found in the action document screened are that baselines and targets are very often missing. The reference year also are very often missing. Very often, as we just mentioned, the targets are included in the wording of the indicators, which should not be the case. And also it happens often that the measurement unit is not harmonized with the formulation of the indicator. For example, we have the number of children for the formulation of the indicator, and in the baseline or the target, we have the percentage of children. So this is something very important you should pay attention to. So finally, we will see the different types of data sources you can use when you develop your Logframe matrix. So where will the information and data come from? So in the action document screened, we found out that the source of verification are very often not specified for each indicator in the Logframe matrix. Very often we have just one data source for a list of indicators. So it should be, even if you want to copy paste it from an indicator to the other, we want to have it specified for each indicator. Very often also the source of verification listed are too vague. So for example, the project report is something we find very often. So the source of verification should be very, very specific. You need to make sure that the data is available at the right frequency to be able to do monitoring of milestones and targets. You should also be very specific on the data collection methods. Is it a survey or a report? And on the reporting responsibilities. Who is in charge of writing these reports? You should also make sure that the data source provides disaggregated data when it is required by your indicator. And you should assess the source of verification in terms of quality of data, availability of data, and reliability, but also you should assess them in terms of cost and complexity to obtain the data. indeed, you have various types of source of verification with various costs and complexity. There are two types of data. You have primary data, when data is collected by the implementing partner, for example, through a project-funded survey, which can be very expensive and complex. And you also have secondary data, for example, government reports or existing statistics. And in this case, data should be accessible at no or very little costs, and you should absolutely make sure that the documents are accessible by the general public or by at least the delegation to be able to get the data and do your reporting. So now we have again a session of questions and answers. I see that it is quite early still, but if you have many questions, we can go until 1.
All right, thank you, Veronique. Right now we have 6 questions, so I'll start with the first one from Joseph, which is, what would be your view on the so-called impact indicators? Would you categorize them as qualitative?
Impact indicators are not always qualitative or quantitative. It's not a question of the level of in the results chain, but more on the formulation of the indicator. So I think I have some examples of indicators at impact level. Let me have a look. For example, here, so here you have example of indicators at impact level and also at the other levels of the results chain. And you can see that you can have various kind of indicators. So you can have NDG indicators or indicators on the poverty reduction or the economic development. They are more of a quantitative nature in this case. For outcome, it can also be, so the number of people using improve water sources if the project is building new water sources. And here at the level of output, number of water points constructed. But the level of in the results chain does not, here we have examples of quantitative indicators, but I don't think that the level in the results chain should influence if indicators are more quantitative or qualitative.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, Joseph, if this answers your question. If you have a follow-up question, please type it in the box. The second question is from Shiva, who says, won't it be possible to have a number of indicators per result, but we select few indicators for our target?
So actually you should have exactly the same number of targets and baselines than the number of indicators you have in your matrix. So as we had on this slide, each indicator should go with one baseline, one target, and one source of verification. Sometimes the source of verification can be exactly the same from one indicator to the other. So you can copy paste, but please do it so that we can identify that you have thought of the source of verification for this specific indicator. But yeah, but you cannot have an indicator with no baseline, no target, and no source of verification. Does it answer your question?
If you can either put a thumbs up or put a follow-up question in the box, please, Shiva. Barbara is asking, should we rework all our indicators to the DevCo results framework?
This is a very good question, actually. People think that since we have a results framework now, we should absolutely use indicators from this framework. It's actually not the case. If there are some links, and we DevCo 06 will help you to identify possible matches with this results framework at the level 1 or 2, but actually you should not aim absolutely at using all indicators we have in the results framework. So it's a very good question. We will help you to identify possible correspondence, but you should not absolutely use indicators from the results framework. If you see possible links, it's good to try to identify it and to have indicators in that direction, but it's not something that is mandatory.
Okay, and we have Jean-Paul who's asking how to deal with baselines in multi-country programs.
That's also a very good question, actually, because when you have multi-country projects or programs, actually you will most of the time have to wait to have the countries defined at the beginning of the project to be able to collect the baseline. And actually, sometimes also you cannot have aggregated baselines or targets. You will have to have baselines and targets for each individual country that are covered. So this is fine. Actually, it's in the case of thematic programs or regional programs, and it is something that is fully understandable. It's a special case you have.
Thank you. And the Rwanda delegation is asking, do we still refer to SMART indicators, or is this outdated? I think maybe the Rwanda delegation joined a little bit later. You might have mentioned this, but do you want to pick up on that?
Actually, we now talk about SMART results. They should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And for indicators, we tell they should be RACER. So they should be relevant. They should be linked to a policy or strategy or an objective. They should be accepted by all stakeholders. They should be credible, easy to monitor and measure regularly, but also robust, using a stable methodology. So we now talk about SMART objectives or results and RACER indicators.
Okay, now let's go to Pia, who has a few questions. Let's start. The first one is, any preference over publicly available versus special reports?
Sorry, I did not get this question.
This is all there is right now, so maybe Pia, if you want to specify what you mean by this. I'll go to the second one. She says, please provide where to find specific instructions to double check if the Logframe matrix is properly filled.
To check if the Logframe matrix is properly filled, you can, as I mentioned before, you can use the instructions for the action documents, which are quite detailed on how to fill in. And also on the template, you will see in the Logframe matrix, you have some indications. And then again, I think I just told it before, we are DevCo 06 helping the delegations and units to develop the indicators and the Logframe matrix. So whenever you have a question on the methodology, you should not hesitate to contact either DevCo 06, my team, myself, or to contact the PPCM help desk if it's something more general on the methodology of the PPCM. Everything that is related to the methodology, there is a help desk with a specific email address that my colleague Lucille will type now in the chat, where you can ask all methodological questions on the PPCM, and everything that is related to Logframe, matrix, indicators, and so, you should not hesitate to ask ask me and my colleagues in DEFCO 06. We have written the instructions on how to fill in the action documents, and we also support you when you write action documents at the stage of the QSG2 at formulation stage. So don't hesitate to get back to us to ask questions if anything is not clear. Maybe you have specific questions on the methodology you want to ask now. Maybe it's not covered by this presentation, I don't know.
Okay, so the question, Pia's question on the preference over publicly available versus special reports refers to the slide 28, which is the cost complexity curve. So can you address that?
If we should prefer publicly available data sources or project-funded surveys, actually we should prefer obviously the data that are already available at no cost or very little cost. So of course we should prefer indicators where you know that the data is available already in a government report or in existing statistics that are publicly available on the internet. World Bank statistics or so. Easily, sometimes you can also process existing statistics, but that's true that it's quite expensive and complex to do project funding surveys. It depends on the kind of survey, but if it's much more expensive and complex than data that you can get with less investment, that's true that you should do the balance actually on the cost and complexity.
Okay, and we have also Pia was asking, what is the results framework?
So the results framework was not covered by this presentation, but actually it's the framework that has been developed by the European Union to actually report on different level of results. So it's I don't have it here actually, but you have 32 indicators for the level 3 and also for the level 1. There are at level 1 indicators more related to the MDGs and soon SDGs, and at level 2 there are indicators that are more related to the EU contribution to specific things that you contribute with your projects. So we can send you the results framework. So, and actually there is a link in the chat where you can find it.
Okay, I think Pia was saying the sound was bad at some point. So Pia, maybe you can let us know what question you didn't hear properly. There's a question from Christina. So for the security sector reform programs, does any reference document exist on how to sex disaggregate indicators?
Actually, sorry? No, this I cannot really. I should investigate with my colleagues if there are any specific documents you can use. In this sector, you should know that for the results framework, if you have an indicator that is linked to an indicator from the results framework, we have developed DEFCO 06 methodological notes where you can see how this indicator is calculated, how to disaggregate data and so. But for specific thematics, also we refer to thematic colleagues.
That's it for questions right now. We still have about 8 minutes left. So if anyone has any other questions or follow-up questions, now's the time. Pia, you haven't typed in, so hopefully you're still hearing us. If there's anything you want Veronique to repeat, please type it in the box. So if there's more questions. Here we go. Pia, please provide link to detail instructions that I'm supposed to use.
We can send you the link on the chat, but actually the instructions for the action documents, they are on the intranet, so they are very easy to find. We can send you the link right now. They are quite long and very specific in each section what you should develop and write. Also, you have templates for the Logframe metrics, and there you have some instructions as well.
Okay, so Shiva says, could you provide the link for the activity matrix as well? Oh, and yes, we will do that, Shiva. And then Christina, at the same time, said, who would be the thematic colleagues for security sector reform issues? I don't know if this is something that you can answer. We can definitely find out. Do you want to respond to that, or? Okay, it's thematic units, but we can look and come back to you on this. So that's been put in the box here. So we've got time for a couple of more questions. Last chance, everyone. Okay, well, Veronique, do you want to have a final word? Do you want to say something in closing?
Thank you, everybody, for spending time with us on the lunchtime. So it's very interesting for us to see your reactions. What are your difficulties when you write an action document, and specifically for us when you write the Logframe matrix? What are the difficulties you encounter when you write indicators? So do not hesitate to write us questions also by email after this session, and we will be very happy to get back to you. Also to mention that there is a very interesting training on LFA and indicators that is organized by MKS, and it's something you can register to on syslog. And I think it's a training, even if everybody might have followed this training a few years ago, things have changed, new templates have been developed. So I think refreshing is always very welcome, and it's very interesting to have things refreshed, and there you also get a lot of tips on much more than what I have covered today, and I encourage you to follow this training, and actually I learned that this training can be organized at in delegation. So if you have a minimum number of people from the delegation, you can also invite implementing partners, which actually is very useful, I think. So I think it's good to know. Thank you very much for being there, and see you soon.